This is the Dallas Morning News.
Welcome to the second season of Beyond Talking Points, an American Middle podcast. I'm Abby McCloskey. We're here to talk all about the first 100 days of the second Trump administration, and today we're talking all about immigration, specifically Trump's two big campaign promises, one, to seal the border, and two, to conduct the largest deportation campaign in American history. Let's get started. A few special notes about our podcast today. This is a hugely emotional issue. So many people's lives have been upended. We've heard a lot about the Maryland father of three who was wrongfully deported. The Supreme Court has ordered the administration to facilitate his return, and so far they have not. But there's local stories too. People who came here seeking asylum who have been detained or sent to mega prisons in El Salvador. Increasingly, we're hearing stories of immigrant families not sending their kids to school or to work or to church. Our refugee program has been indefinitely suspended. Hundreds of student visas have been revoked. And so today we're going to talk about the economics of immigration and what's happening at our southern border. But I don't want to lose sight of the human side of this story and that there's ways to secure our border while not compromising our shared humanity. And last but not least, our guest today has her own personal views that are not reflective necessarily of those of the Federal Reserve System. I'm here with Pia Orrenius to talk about immigration. Pia, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So as part of this podcast series, we get to hear from experts all across America. But you, Pia, are in our backyard of Dallas Morning News. You are the vice president in the research department of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. And you've co-authored many an immigration paper with Madeline Zavadny, who we heard on our first series of the podcast, and are an expert on all things immigration, and immigration is in the hot seat. So I am so thankful to be speaking with you today.
Well, thank you.
I just really want to start off broad with what Trump 2.0 means for immigration in America.
Yeah, well, it means whiplash because we've gone from one extreme and then we may be headed to another. So what I mean by that is after the pandemic, we had very permissive policies at the border. We let in, by our estimates, anywhere from 5.5 to 8 million people let in at the border, basically, or across the border and entered the United States. And so we had really a historic surge in migration. And many of them, again, they were paroled into the country, given work permits, and joined the labor force and actually worked and continue to work. And so after that kind of historic high of surge migration, now we're having a reversal where the Trump administration, of course, has announced mass deportations is what their goal, but also they're rolling back a lot of these policies that were put in place by the prior administration. So things like humanitarian parole, especially for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. Also TPS, with temporary protected status, another kind of policy in place for Haitians and also some Venezuelans. So we're seeing a lot of changes, and we've also seen a steep decline in immigration at the southwest border. And so I think we're at, down about 95% in terms of migrant encounters at the border compared to last year this time.
Well, and I want to talk about that because there's a really strong case to be made that, look, it's a success story. I think President Trump said it in his address to Congress that all we needed was a new president. And look, we had these historic crossings, permissive policies under the Biden administration, and now it's fixed. And the border's more or less secure. What is your take on that?
I think that it's important to have a consistent policy on the border. And obviously, record high surge migration is not a sustainable policy. And so I think my hope is that if policymakers perceive that the border is under control and that they're controlling who can come in and who cannot, and that they feel that the border is secure, then maybe, my distant hope is that this will lead them, to have the confidence to begin working on comprehensive immigration reform.
I want to start with some of the high-profile immigration incidents that have happened within Trump's first 100 days. And I guess, in a sense, to piggyback on your sustainability comment, like if this is a type of policy you expect will continue. And probably the biggest flash in the pan was last month when the president deported 238 Venezuelan nationals to a mega prison in El Salvador. We saw pictures of these guys, heads shaved, white athletic clothes. Officers had their face covered. Kind of scary pictures. They're going into prison. We don't have a lot of information after that. And a judge had said, no, you can't do this. You can't have the deportation flights, but Trump went ahead and did it anyway. And now you have the situation, some people, of course, family members are saying these guys weren't part of a gang, but you don't really know. And I think other people are maybe just glad that we have violent people out of the country, all of which is to say it's high profile. And at the same time, it's actually kind of confusing about what's going on. Is this legal, not legal? Is this normal, not normal? Can you talk to us about that?
I guess my take on it is really that all this shows is that really what the goal in the administration, I think, is to increase deportations, really accelerate deportations. And especially, of course, go after, criminals and dangerous gang members and so forth. And obviously, yes, criminal immigrants should be deported, and home countries presumably should be supportive and take their immigrants back if they are not welcome here. So I think that's clear that should be a priority, of course. But I think the other thing that this shows is that it's actually really hard and complicated to find deportable immigrants and to put them through the process, to find detention space, to get the home country to accept them. It's really difficult and very costly. I mean, some estimate by The Economist, I think, came in at like $14,000 per deportable immigrant in terms of the cost of finding, apprehending, detaining, and actually deporting them back to their home country. So I think what you're seeing is like a lot of desire for a lot of deportations in a quick manner. And, that is running into the reality of how difficult this is under our current system. So because if you've been in the country more than 2 years, you're supposed to have your procedure play out in court. They just can't pick you up and remove you without some kind of court proceedings. And so it's just very complicated to do these things. And I think probably, they're taking some shortcuts to try to show some results. But I think in general, if you look at ICE arrests right now, they're up considerably from the Biden administration, just if you have data through February. But they're still only running at about 550 arrests per day. I think, if you tally it all up, the best case scenario I could figure out was about 250,000 deportations in a year is like pretty much max what we could do. And maybe only even half of that. So extraordinary measures, may be implemented in order for the administration to reach their goals.
And I want to talk about two of the reasons, to what I can tell, behind the administration's desire for mass deportations. And one is crime, and the second is the economic impact. And so I want to talk about the crime impact because I've seen the academic literature that unauthorized immigrants actually commit a lot less crimes than U.S. citizens. And that's not just a one-off study. That's a pretty consistent finding. But on the other hand, we're in, a post 9/11 environment, concerns of terrorists crossing the borders. There's a lot of talk about, and in actuality, like gang violence, fentanyl, human trafficking across the border, this kind of trail of criminal horrors. And so how does a normal person make sense of this?
Yeah, I think you're right, Abby, that the research really shows almost uniformly that immigrants to the U.S. are much less likely to commit crime than similar natives. So and I think a lot of that has to do with, obviously their precarious status here in terms of, they have a lot of incentives not to commit crimes because obviously you'll lose your status or you'll get yourself deported. There's a lot of bad consequences. But, immigrants basically, they come here to work. They come here to try to fly below the radar, I think, in many instances. But in any case, I think the research is clear on this. They're less likely to commit crime. And I think also the research shows, for example, they're also less likely to join. If you look at young immigrant men, for example, they're less likely to join gangs than similar young Native men. So there's not a big link there. But of course, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't go after the ones that are there. Of course, you should as a law-abiding nation. But yeah, the link isn't there in general between crime and immigration per se. Now, I guess I will say that on the In the second generation, there's, maybe a little bit of, there might be some evidence that in the second generation, if there's, a failure to really integrate or, there's some slippage in the second generation. So these are the children of immigrants. So I'm not as familiar with the work on the children of immigrants, but it's true that there could be, higher rates of crime or gang activity in the second generation. But in the first generation among immigrants themselves, we really don't see that.
And what about that's super helpful. What about the economic impact that, especially because of the surge of immigration we had following COVID and during the Biden administration, that, although this has been a talking point for a long time, that immigrants take American jobs, they drive our wages down, they have access to, what gets told, they have access to wide-ranging government benefits, and in essence, part of returning the U.S. to a golden age economically is immigrants, legal and illegal, basically not being here anymore.
Yeah, so that doesn't, in terms of what we see in the economic impact of immigration, it's actually been, especially from the macroeconomic perspective, the data, the research, it's been overwhelmingly positive in terms of, it grows the economy. Immigrants in a typical year make up about half of labor force growth. And so,
wow.
But actually in the last 3 years or so with the surge migration that you and I talked about earlier, that share is closer to like 80 or 85% of labor force growth has been due to immigration the last 3 years. The fact that they've been also, and we can track them now these last 3 years because they were given work permits. And so they're actually, working in the official economy, they're on the payrolls, they're contributing taxes. So we're actually able to see them in the jobs data. I think one estimate from the Brookings Institute shows that the surge migration in the last 3 years lifted job creation monthly by about 80,000 jobs. So yeah, people might be wondering, like, how is that possible? So, if they're taking 80,000 jobs and all that's 80,000 less for native workers or U.S.-born workers. And so it just doesn't work like that. It's like, it's really the pie getting bigger. It's not one slice of the pie going to somebody else. It's actually, we're growing the pie because we're growing the economy. So we've had this tremendous GDP growth growing above potential, job growth above potential. And so as a result, you have to think of capital investments. So businesses, when they have access to labor, they expand, they invest, they build more structures, they expand their business. And so that's the way that we accommodate more workers without hurting wages. So that's kind of the economic miracle of the United States. The way it's been is that we have this lots of investment by companies, especially when they can hire. And so I think when you can't hire and you can't expand because you can't find the workers, that's when things slow down. And so if naturally you can couple the in-migration with the capital investment, you just get kind of this very nice result where you expand the economy and you can have higher growth and you can actually, everyone wins.
Well, so, and let's, I want to dig into the everyone wins a little bit and talk specifically about the economic impact in Texas, because I think there can be a story that's, great in aggregate immigration for GDP, for America, whatever. But if you're a border state and if you're a state with an enormous border like Texas, who has to have resources diverted down there to the extent that the federal government has abdicated responsibility in the past, well, then it doesn't matter that there's these job budget economic benefits because our state is paying the cost in terms of security, crime, whatever, name your issue. What has been just in aggregate the impact of immigration on our state?
So in Texas, I think in general, the effects are similar to those nationally in the sense that, it grows the economy. And it's especially important in Texas because we grow twice as fast as the nation on average. So we really rely on immigration, not just from other countries, but also from other states. We see a lot of people moving here from California, for example. And this helps us grow faster. And the other thing about Texas, and we've shown this in work that we've done, is that the immigrants that we bring to Texas are actually filling gaps in the skill set of native Texans. So if we see, for example, given so many firms and companies are moving to Texas as well, there's a huge need, especially for skilled labor. And so we don't produce enough ourselves in Texas. And that hopefully that's changing. But in terms of high-skilled immigrants, if you look at the migrants that are coming from other states and from other countries, they, on the high-skilled end, they're in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. They're in healthcare. They're in fields where we're not producing enough to keep up with our own growth. And so they've been very complementary to kind of the native workforce. And I think that's really allowed us to grow and also diversify. So, over the last 4 decades, really Texas is just a tremendous example of a diversification success from cattle, cotton, and oil economy to this, modern industrial powerhouse with huge high tech, huge, medical health. Just none of this would have been possible without just the immigration that we've had.
That's really helpful. And I want to use that as a segue to talk about kind of categories of legal immigration. So move from deportations to ways that you can come here legally. And we'll talk about for work in a minute. But one of the main categories of that has historically been refugees. But has that program been shut down? If you are seeking asylum, can that happen in America under Trump 2.0?
You can, and I think the refugee program has been mostly shut down. So the refugee program is different from the, asylum seekers in the sense that we get our refugees from, those are people that are already approved for resettlement to different countries in the world that take refugees. And so they're vetted and they come here and they get green cards.
So like from Ukraine, for example.
Ukraine or Syria, other places that basically war zones produce a lot of refugees. And we do usually take in typically between 50 and 100,000 of those per year, and they get to stay permanently.
And we're not doing that anymore.
No, sadly not. I mean, hopefully they're reviewing the program and maybe they'll restart it. But no, it's on hold right now. That was announced by the Trump administration. So the other program that we have, so you can be a refugee and come through these programs where you're vetted and approved, or you can kind of take matters into your own hands, come to the U.S. and seek asylum here directly from the U.S. government. And so those asylum seekers, so that's way down, of course, because I think at the U.S.-Mexico border right now, which is where we got most of our asylum seekers, a lot of surge migrants that we talked about before were actually asylum seekers. So I think now what we're doing is the Trump administration has re-implemented the Remain in Mexico program. So if you do approach the immigration officials at the U.S.-Mexico border, they will tell you, okay, we'll review your case. You can wait in Mexico. So I think for that, for many people, it's a disincentive to apply for asylum. And especially if you look at the asylum, most asylum cases fail in this country. So I think we are running right now around 70% of cases fail. Only 30% of cases are approved. So most asylum seekers, the great majority, actually never get their asylum approved. And this is usually after 5 to 10 years waiting to get a final decision. And so most of them are turned down, and then they're supposed to go back to their home countries. Anyway, I imagine the inflow into the asylum program right now is very, very sharply reduced because we basically have nobody coming to the border. Like I said, encounters with migrants at the border are down 95%.
Interesting. But we are no longer, if you are a refugee, if you're in a war-torn country, the U.S. is no longer opening its arms to you. Seems like a big change.
No, it appears that at the moment we are not.
And what about something that's also longstanding U.S. policy? I want to talk about why that is, which is birthright citizenships. Why has this been U.S. policy? Because the Trump administration has pointed that out as something that they would like to see changed also, which I believe is constitutional, so not so easy to change.
It's hard to change. It's really interesting, the birthright citizenship. So if we take the emotions out of it, and just look at it on its face value, it's actually a very, very generous policy. I don't know any other country that has this policy. So, it's very generous. The thing so you can argue that nobody else has it. Why should we have it? We should take it away. But sure, you can, I guess, if you could get this, it is a constitutional amendment, very difficult to remove it. But I would argue at the same time that it seems like an exceedingly positive or exceptional policy that other countries don't implement. It's actually served us well. And because I think when we compare integration of immigrants and assimilation of immigrants into the U.S. economy and U.S. society and compare that to Europe, like we actually see our integration is much more successful. Like immigrants come here, they're able to work. Even if they're undocumented, somehow in the U.S., we let everybody work. So they work and they contribute and they feel part of this economy. They feel like they have their little piece of the American dream. And then their kids are, born here and they're citizens. And then this integration, especially of the second generation, I mean, it's so much more successful here than it is in other places, other developed economies. So I think it's worked really well. The thing I would really, really worry about is if we took it away, what happens to assimilation and integration, especially when we have such large numbers of undocumented immigrants living here and coming here.
What about people who come here legally to work, or whether they're green card holders or whatever? And there's been some high-profile deportations of folks who've then been associated with, say, Hamas rallies at some of our Ivy League colleges. So I know you're kind of at will here, obviously, if you're on a work visa, a green card, that you're not a full-fledged U.S. citizen. Do you not have full rights? Kind of, is this deportation, is this also kind of normal or legal, or how do you think about it?
I'm not certainly a legal expert, but I know that the government, when it comes to non-citizens, so anybody with a green card or anybody on a temporary visa, the government has very broad powers with regard to those individuals. So non-citizens don't have nearly the rights that citizens do. So where that comes down exactly in terms of, do non-citizens have right to free speech? Do they have, I'm not a legal expert, but I just know that the government has very broad powers over non-citizens.
Interesting. Well, let's talk about the politics of reform and where you started, which is on the need for comprehensive immigration reform. And one tool that's being leveraged potentially for this or for other reasons, it's not so clear, is tariffs, and tariffs on Mexico and Canada. And basically saying, kind of, if you don't clean up your Immigration Act, so we're going to hike your tariff rates even higher and make it really hard to trade with us. Could tariffs help move us towards comprehensive immigration reform?
I think that Mexico and Canada work with us on immigration, regardless of, I'm not privy to sort of the inner workings of international diplomacy here. But I know, for example, during the migration surge in 2023, as the national election was drawing closer, I know the Biden administration went to Mexico and asked for help.
Yeah,
they said, hey, Mexico is a transit country. There's like literally millions of people arriving at the U.S.-Mexico border. Could you guys help us reduce the flow? And they did. They actually did. If you look at the data, it shows, after they were asked to help, the Mexicans did, really increased enforcement and apprehensions of migrants that were transiting through Mexico. And we saw a big, big decrease in encounters on the U.S. border. So they help us. I don't know, if Biden offered them, treats or tricks, if you will. But it worked. I think our neighbors want to work with us and they want to solve the problem. And I think attention to the problem helps, us seek solutions together. I think the Canadians are also addressing, we get very little undocumented immigration across the U.S.-Canada border, but it had increased a lot in the last couple of years, from maybe 4,000 or 5,000 a month to maybe 20,000 a month. So we're not used to seeing that from Canada. But and I think approaching Canada, the Trump administration has been successful in getting the Canadians to look at that and address it. So, but in terms of what you need to make that happen, I have no idea. But, I think talking to each other, working together as neighbors, I think they've always been helpful.
So I could see a case as we bring this conversation towards the end that basically says, look, the border's sealed, a lot less people are crossing. We're doing some high profile deportations of gang members, and immigration is solved. So we don't really have to do this anymore. Can you explain to me why comprehensive immigration reform is needed and what it would do?
Oh, yes. Well, we need comprehensive immigration reform for a number of reasons. But I mean, basically, we talked about the economic effects of immigration, and the number one really is adding to the labor force. And so that's just going to become more and more important because we're an aging society, and I've just gone through a period of just mass retirements, exodus out of the labor force of the baby boomers, and that's going to continue for a few more years. I think the Congressional Budget Office estimates that by 2033, there will be zero net growth in the U.S. labor force. In the U.S.-born labor force, there will be zero net growth. All growth after that will come from immigration. So let's think about that. If you're a policymaker, think forward. Already our own labor force growth is really slowing due to aging, fewer children, baby boomers retiring, et cetera. So if we want growth and we want to keep companies here and we want to keep investment flowing, we want to keep the dynamic, robust U.S. economy, we're going to need immigrants. Other things too, tax reform can spur labor force participation. There's other things we can do, but immigrants are going to be really key to this.
But what if someone says, well, okay, fine. So our labor force is not growing as fast as it was. That means the people who are the Americans who are in the labor force get higher wages because demand will go up because there just aren't as many other people to do the job. So isn't that a win for U.S. workers?
Well, what actually happens is if you can't hire workers and the workforce is shrinking, you're going to get less investment. And so if you get less investment, wages are not going to go up. So if you don't have a growing economy, wages are not going to rise. So really what you need is this ecosystem of investment, workers, growth. That's really kind of what we need. Or productivity growth. Like maybe you're right, Abby, maybe with AI, like we won't need immigrants or any workers at all. And we can all just become owners of AI capital and just sit at home and be happy.
Yikes.
But I think assuming the engine of the economy continues like it has in the past, we really do kind of need labor, we need capital, we need innovation. And remember also that this high-skill immigration, so much of that is the reason we are the global powerhouse of high-tech innovation, the global powerhouse of research and development. That has been immigration has been so important to making that happen. And so I think we need to continue that. That's really the secret sauce here. So these are all reasons to, increase immigration, to make it better, make it function better. And also, if you do comprehensive immigration reform, maybe you can take some of the pressure off of the border. You can allow people to come legally, both low-skilled and high-skilled. There's lots of ways to do this. And the thing I always tell people, I'm like, immigration reform is free. It's not like a tax cut. A tax cut is very expensive. But if you want growth for free, do immigration reform. People will come to your country. It doesn't cost you anything. They're going to help expand the economy, bigger pie, higher productivity growth. What's not to like?
I want to close with this. I know it's hard for an economist and a policy analyst to talk about emotions, but we're going to do it, Pia. And because I think that while the border is more secure than arguably it was during the Biden administration, that the high-profile deportations, the language around immigration, that there is a tremendous fear and uncertainty in our immigrant community. And that might be really hard to measure or understand, or maybe there's a sense of, well, you broke the law by coming here, so you deserve to feel a little like you're on shaky ground. But it seems like something there has been like irreparably lost to me. And so as someone who's studied this issue for her whole professional life, how do you think about that and the kind of compassion and human side to how we make sure our nation is safe and prosperous and works for those of us here?
Yeah, I worry about that too, in the sense, even just, from the economics perspective, if people are fearful, if immigrants are fearful of leaving their homes, of sending their kids to school, of going to work, they're going to be cooped up at home. They're going to be less likely to work, less likely to get an education, less likely to even go to church or go to the hospital and seek the medical care they need. And so then that's such a slippery slope. Then you get all these, bad outcomes from that, whether it's less educated children and it's, people that are more sick or people that are more victimized. They become victims of crime because they're fearful of reporting crime to the police. And so you get a lot of bad outcomes when you marginalize a community, through fear. And so I am concerned about that as well. I think I'm not sure, how you move forward on that other than with, like we talked about, some kind of comprehensive immigration reform that gives people an opportunity to come out of the shadows and sort of, get some kind of legal status, whether it's temporary or permanent. I'm not sure how that would play out, but I agree with you. It's not a good strategy for the long run because you get so many bad outcomes.
Yeah, I agree. It's something that worries me. Thanks for being here, Pia, for all your work on this important issue, the economic impact of immigration on Texas and America. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm Abby McCloskey, and this is Beyond Talking Points, where we talk about what America was promised and what we're getting. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back with you next week.